on Jim in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Up on Jim and cue Steve.
And hello, everyone, and welcome once again to Debate Week here on Arkansas PBS. At this hour, the candidates for Lieutenant Governor, and they are in alphabetical order. The Libertarian candidate, Mr. Frank Gilbert, the Democratic nominee, Ms. Kelly Krout, and the Republican candidate, Ms. Leslie Rutledge. The questions for the debate will be coming tonight, or coming during the broadcast, from Brandon Evans of 4029 News, Fort Smith and Fayetteville, Christina Munoz of Arkansas PBS and Natural State Update. I'm Steve Barnes. The rules for the debate have been agreed upon by all candidates, and they are: each will receive 1 minute to respond to questions. The candidates will have 30 seconds for rebuttal if they choose. And at the conclusion of questioning, each nominee will have 1 minute for a closing statement. Now, the order of candidate appearance was determined prior to the debate in a drawing that was overseen by the candidates themselves or their representatives. Our first question will be coming from Brandon Evans to Mr. Gilbert. Brandon.
Candidate Gilbert, on the subject of qualifications, what about your past experience, current platforms and policies make you feel you are the best fit for this position?
I appreciate that question and the opportunity to talk about some of the best times of my life. The qualifications include elective office. I've been a mayor, a constable, and a coroner. The 8 years that I served as the mayor of Tull were some of the best of my life. Enjoyable times, but not without some controversy. You don't serve in public office without irritating some folks, and we did some of that. But overall, I think I served each of those offices well. And in addition, for this particular office, I think I'm qualified because in my real life, the last 20 years of my work experience were as an in-school supervisor at Bauxite High School. And in dealing with rowdy young men and women, I think I'm supremely qualified to oversee the Senate.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Krout, you have 1 minute.
Yes, sir. Thank you. And thanks, UCA, for having us. Excited to be here to get to share a little bit about why we want this position. So most of my adult life has been spent serving as a foster parent, and I've recently become a licensed social worker. So I've had the opportunity to learn how average Arkansans are struggling, what families need to be able to do well. Lieutenant Governor, of course, presides over the Senate and would vote to break a tie and become the governor if they were to resign or die. And so there's some space in there for some other work, right? And so I kind of see this as a position of advocacy and an ability to be a megaphone across the state for issues that are important to Arkansas families and children. So I'm advocating for proactive policy that allows people to do well here in the state.
Ms. Rutledge, 1 minute.
Well, thank you. And thank you to Arkansas PBS for hosting these debates. Being qualified for Lieutenant Governor means that I'm ready in the event that called to be governor. Over the last 8 years, I've had the honor of serving as the state's Attorney General, defending our constitutional rights, protecting children against online predators and others, making sure that consumers are protected. I've lowered the budget at the Attorney General's office. We have served more Arkansans with smaller staff and smaller budget. And we're going to use that same microphone in the Lieutenant Governor's office to be the economic ambassador to grow more jobs here in the natural state. I'm a 7th generation Arkansan. I'm married to a row crop farmer, but most importantly, I'm a mom. And when I became a mother to Juliana in 2018, I knew when I saw that face exactly how much God loves us. It's made me a better person, a better Christian. It's made me a better Attorney General. And with you all's support, it'll make me a better Lieutenant Governor for the great state of Arkansas.
Ms. Rutledge, thank you. Time now for rebuttal or for follow-up. And Mr. Gilbert, you have 30 seconds.
And not having had an opportunity to do an introduction, I failed to thank PBS and you all for being here. I apologize. What a great organization PBS is, and I appreciate the folks who have come out and worked today to let this happen. I look forward to serving as Lieutenant Governor or in any capacity that I can be of assistance.
Ms. Krout, you have 30 seconds.
Absolutely. I always like to add to the experience conversation. I realize that my experience is different from some of the others on the stage with me this morning, but a lot of what makes a good leader is the ability to listen and the ability to learn, the willingness to do that, and to have creative solutions, kind of out of the box solutions so that we can start making progress. We don't always have to do things the way they've always been done, so I'm excited to bring some new ideas to Arkansas.
And Ms. Rutledge, 30 seconds.
And I look forward as Lieutenant Governor to being the economic ambassador for the state of Arkansas to make sure that we are growing jobs in Paragould, Pocahontas, Texarkana, all across the state, as well as to work with our next governor, my longtime friend, Sarah Huckabee Sanders, to make certain that we eliminate the individual income tax. We're going to be working together with the legislature, the executive branch, to make sure that we have an Arkansas where we can raise families in safe neighborhoods and have economic prosperity for everyone.
Thank you. And our next question from Ms. Munoz, and it goes first to Ms. Krout.
Thank you, Ms. Krout. We've already mentioned that the Lieutenant Governor presides over the Senate. So how would you go about reaching across the aisle when it comes to calming down the divisiveness with regard to partisan politics?
Absolutely. That's a great question, and I love this question because I actually used to be very conservative. I haven't always been on this side of the aisle, and so I very much understand how everyone in the situation is thinking, and I feel like I've got a good ability to communicate to both sides of the issue. One of the styles of campaigning that I've used has just been very conversational, bringing people in, not being divisive, not being judgmental, and letting everybody say their piece so that we can start making some progress together. I'm very comfortable working in spaces with people on both sides. I have Republican friends who are campaigning for me, so I am very comfortable in that space and think that we can make a lot of progress together. One of the things I don't think people really wrap their heads around when we're looking at politics is even some of our most divisive issues, we can make a lot of progress together policy-wise that helps everyone without necessarily agreeing on the original issue completely. There's still room for growth.
Ms. Rutledge.
Over the last 8 years, I've had the opportunity to work with our legislature on very difficult issues. And so I hope to bring, as the Lieutenant Governor, the body of the Senate, that same sort of civility to where we are able to work through issues, conduct the business for the people of Arkansas on the Senate floor, and to make sure that all sides are heard, but to ensure, again, that civility. Americans and Arkansans are tired of the divisiveness that they see in politics. We need to be able to get things done. And sometimes that means that we have to find the 80% of things that we agree on and leave that 20% aside. Let's find ways to grow more jobs in our communities across the state, to roll back regulations off the backs of small businesses, to help our law enforcement officers receive more training so we can have safe neighborhoods for our kids, to ensure every child has the opportunity to have an education that they need and deserve, and one that their parents encourage them. We want to make sure we have parental choice in education. We want to have more kids going into the workforce out of high school. These are the sort of things that we can talk about and bring together in the state Senate for the state of Arkansas.
Mr. Gilbert.
What a great question. And it is obvious that politics in Arkansas is more divisive than in any time in my life. I used to talk about Team Red and Team Blue, but I'm afraid we've become Tribe Red and Tribe Blue. We are involved in tribal politics to the point that we often are unable to disagree civilly. We tend to objectify and demonize those that we disagree with, and that has created a culture in Arkansas politics that has driven away the voters in hordes. Arkansas has the least participation in electoral politics in the nation. 1/4, thereabouts, of the folks even bother to vote in the primaries. Less than half usually in the general elections, and a lot of those who vote in the generals are voting out of habit. I hope as a libertarian I'll be able to change that conversation realistically.
Thank you. Ms. Krout.
Yes, as Frank mentioned, he's dealt with some rowdy characters before. I'm a mom of 7 sons, and so I actually wrote sort of a silly song during the campaign, because I like to campaign kind of uniquely, and one of the lines went, "I've got 7 sons, I can handle a rowdy Senate, even if it's mostly Republican Senate." And I realize I'm running as in the minority party here in Arkansas. That doesn't intimidate me, and like I mentioned before, I think there's a lot of space to be able to work together, and I'm ready to do that kind of work.
Ms. Rutledge.
Well, as the Attorney General for the last 8 years, I don't know that we're going to be able to get the Senate to sing Kumbaya together, but I do believe that there's an opportunity to sit down and have civil discourse to ensure that as the Lieutenant Governor presiding over the Senate, that it'll be my job to call balls and strikes, to make sure that those who are advocating their positions are heard and allowed to do so in a respectful manner. I've worked very closely with these senators, and I look forward to working with them over the next 4 years as their Lieutenant Governor.
30 seconds for Mr. Gilbert.
The truth of the matter is that the job of Lieutenant Governor has very little to do even with the Senate these days. The Senate does not want a member of the executive body looking over its shoulder, and I think they have an argument to be made there. The truth of the matter is, if we did it right, and if we could, we probably ought to eliminate this office. In the meantime, let someone who has a different perspective come in, oversee the Senate to the degree that it needs it, and otherwise stay out of politics.
Thank you, sir. Question for General Rutledge. You've talked a couple of times, General, about the need for civility in public life. You and a number of other attorneys general are the target of recommended sanctions by a nonprofit organization which accuses you and which asserts that you and others, in the context of the 2020 presidential election, spread what they term false assertions and frivolous allegations about the election. In light of that, and in light of the fact that none of the subsequent investigations have uncovered any serious malfeasance anyway in terms of the 2020 election, should you be sanctioned? Also, follow-up question, is Joe Biden the legitimate president of the United States?
Well, thank you, Steve, for that question. And the complaint against me and the other AGs is nothing more than a political attack, as we saw. It was a blanket. They used the same language. Absolutely frivolous. We worked very closely with the attorneys at the AG's office before joining those efforts in December of 2020, because it was really a matter of making sure those state legislatures had the power that they needed in order to conduct the elections. With regard to the election, I said very clearly, and in February and even up until President Joe Biden was sworn into office, that he was elected president and that we swore him in on January 20th, 2021. There are many press statements. I encourage members of the media to look into that if they will. But what we need to look at, rather, when it comes to Joe Biden, is not when he was elected, but rather what he's done since he's been president. And since he's been president, I've taken over 100 legal actions against this president for his illegal actions as president of the United States.
Mr. Gilbert.
I think this is a prime example of the culture that I was talking about earlier. It's not good enough to disagree with the Attorney General. You have to go after her personally. You have to attack her, and you have to use the courts to do it with. The courts should be impartial arbiters, not tools of destruction. And tools of destruction is what too many on both the left and the right, Democrats and Republicans, are looking for in politics these days. I was approached by 2 news media folks about my membership in an organization called Oath Keepers. The Anti-Defamation League had sought out news media to let them know that I and others had joined that organization. It is a good organization. I stand by what I did when I joined it. I have no problem with the organization. What they did, some individuals on January 6th, is between them and the Attorney General of the United States.
I have to end it there. Ms. Krout.
Okay, thank you for the interesting question. I love talking about civility in politics. I think that's something that is missing. I think if anyone can get the Senate to sing Kumbaya, it would be me, but that is for the voters to decide. I find it really interesting that my opponent is really against frivolous political attacks, because as I've been watching, that is mostly what I have seen. I have seen her wake up and sue Joe Biden. I mean, I've heard you say that. I'd love to wake up and sue Joe Biden today, over and over again. And it is a use of our taxpayer dollars. And I wish people were paying attention to that, because it's not helping our state. I'm Kelly Krout. I'm running for lieutenant governor here in Arkansas. You know, there's a lot of talk about Joe Biden, who does already have a job president as he won the election. So thank you.
Ms. Krout, thank you. General Rutledge, back to you for 30 seconds.
Well, as you can see, neither of my opponents are prepared for civility in politics. But let's go back to Joe Biden. I do wake up every morning and have to ask myself, as your Attorney General, how am I going to sue Joe Biden today? And we've done just that, whether it was over the cancellation of the Keystone Pipeline, now saddling Americans with $400 billion worth of student loan cancellation that adults took out on their own. All of these things we have done to protect Arkansans. And I'm going to keep doing that as your Attorney General and fight for you as your Lieutenant Governor.
Mr. Gilbert.
Thank you. First, civility. I think Leslie may have misunderstood what I was saying. I was actually defending her against that attack, which I consider ruthless and unnecessary. Secondly, I don't know how we can approach a problem that is this ingrained without hurting some feelings. Kumbaya is not going to get us there. We're going to have to be honest with each other.
Ms. Krout.
Clearly, I would not make the Senate sing Kumbaya. I think civility in politics, we're talking about, you know, not mudslinging, not dragging people, being kind, being respectful in the way that we communicate. I would never say anything about Attorney General Rutledge that I wouldn't say right here with her right next to me. And we do need to hold our leaders accountable. And so when we're spending taxpayer money on these frivolous lawsuits, it's not good for Arkansans. What would be good for Arkansans? Student loan forgiveness. That's going to allow us to spend money here in our state that will continue to boost our economy and help the average Arkansan.
Thank you. Our next question comes from Mr. Evans, and it goes first to Ms. Krout.
Candidate Krout, I want to talk about the 4 ballot issues that will be up for voters to decide, whether it's recreational marijuana, procedural changes when it comes to emergency sessions, or changes to religious freedom. What do you feel are the most important of those 4 when it comes to the future of Arkansas, and what would your advice be to voters on that issue?
The most important ballot issue on the ballot this year is issue 2. I am very concerned about requiring a 60% threshold for ballot measures to pass. It is already incredibly difficult for citizens to get a ballot measure on the ballot. They're going to have to file a title. They're going to have to get a ton of signatures. This year it was upwards of 100,000 signatures, and we all saw how many signatures get thrown out every year. And then there's a whole process with the wording. It's very difficult to get something on there. And so for us to try to make it even more cumbersome to pass legislation through a citizen initiative, I find very concerning. And I honestly see it as kind of an insult to the voters of Arkansas that the legislature doesn't think that we can come up with good enough ideas that should be passed at the same 50% threshold that the legislature is able to pass. This actually puts us in a scenario where minority rules, where the 40% could get to decide whether or not something passes. And I think that's just wrong. So I'm a strong no on issue 2. I think it's really important.
Ms. Rutledge, 1 minute.
I think it's important for Arkansans to read all 4 of these ballot initiatives and to discuss them with their neighbors and to decide whether or not they want to legalize recreational marijuana, whether or not they believe that our legislature should be able to call themselves into session. Currently, only the governor can call a special session. Right now, we have a part-time legislature. And so we need to have those conversations amongst citizens of whether or not they want our legislature to be able to do that. When it comes to the ballot initiatives and whether or not we had that 50% threshold or 60%, let's look at how many times the Arkansas Constitution has been amended. It's been amended nearly or over 100 times. 100 times we have amended the Arkansas Constitution. It should be actually quite difficult to amend the Constitution of the state of Arkansas. We don't want this to be something that's done willy-nilly with out-of-state money coming in to influence and to buy elections and to change our Constitution. And when it comes to defending religious liberty, we're going to keep doing that in Arkansas. I have done it as your Attorney General, and we will always defend our religious liberty rights.
1 minute now to Mr. Gilbert.
Thank you, and I agree with Kelly and Leslie both on this, but I believe number 4 is the one that I would choose as most important. And I do so because of the impact that it has on people's daily lives. My friend Melissa Fulks with Arkansas Truegrass is campaigning actively against number 4 because of the structural nature that it's set up. 8 folks are going to get filthy rich off of it, and I hate that. But what I hate more is seeing young people arrested every day for possession, going before courts, probation that follows, perhaps some jail time. As a driver for Uber and Lyft, one of the most frequent drops I have is not just the airport and the Amazon fulfillment center, but the probation department. And folks, it breaks my heart to see that many young people's lives disrupted that way.
Time for follow-up now. Ms. Krout, your first 30 seconds.
Yes, and I agree with Ms. Rutledge. I want everybody to read these ballot issues for themselves and really figure out what makes the most sense. I also want to acknowledge something that she said. Something that happens a lot when I listen to Ms. Rutledge talk about things is that there's a bunch of language that is kind of intended to make you feel fearful, and it's a little manipulative in nature, if I'm honest. So when we use phrases like out-of-state money and special interest groups that the average voter doesn't necessarily understand, it feels like it's intended to freak people out. I want us to be clear and concise with what we're trying to say what you mean. Also, we have religious freedom. We live in the USA.
All right, Ms. Rutledge, 30 seconds.
Well, thank you. And again, it's important for Arkansans to read all 4 of these ballot measures to ensure that what you vote on, that you thoroughly understand. Too often we have talked to Arkansans who've said, I didn't really understand issue 2 or issue 4 or whatever it might be. And so folks, make sure that you spend time over the next 25 days to read those ballot initiatives, to understand them, so that way you can vote how you feel is best for the state of Arkansas.
And back to Mr. Gilbert. You have another 30 seconds, sir.
An opportunity to address what the Attorney General said about amending the Constitution, how we seem to have done so willy-nilly, I believe was the word she used. It's unfortunate that she didn't talk about how the state legislature goes about amending the Constitution. They get to do so 3 times at every session in any way they wish to. The strictures of ballot titles and language and all the others that ours go through do not apply to the legislature, and that's unfortunate.
Thank you, sir. Our next question comes from Ms. Munoz, and it goes first to Ms. Rutledge.
So in preparation for this debate, we allowed viewers via social media to submit some questions. We want to be sure we get those to you as well. This one comes from Pope County. To Ms. Rutledge, what role should state government play in transitioning us to cleaner and renewable energy?
Well, thank you. And already, for the last 8 years as the Attorney General, I've worked very closely, and we have what's called the CURAD department, where we deal with utilities and look at making sure that our utility rates are down, but also deals with our environmental policies and making certain that when we have issues that come down from the federal government, such as the Waters of the U.S. rule, that we push back. We want to make sure that America remains energy independent. What we have seen under President Joe Biden is he's making us energy dependent. And I believe that it's our job as state leaders to make certain that we are making decisions not just to have clean, renewable, but to have a diverse energy in order to withstand things such as what we saw in the power outages in Texas that they didn't anticipate in the last couple of years with those ice and snowstorms. We want to make certain that in times where we have droughts that our farmers and ranchers have the water that they need for their crops and for their livestock. All of this is important to the state of Arkansas, but also to the security of the United States.
Thank you. Mr. Gilbert, 1 minute.
In a sane world, I don't think the state of Arkansas or any other level of government would be involved in encouraging people to do what they need to do in their personal lives. That's not the world we live in right now, and as a result, I recently signed up for the solar program in my house that gets us a super rate on a lot of money over a long period of time to make us a little more energy independent. I look at that and I see it in the eyes of my friend Mark Moore, who shares the economic values that I do and the understanding of government as a tool of destruction most often and not of construction. He said in programs like this, go ahead and take the money. It'll just break the system more quickly and we can do better when we build it back.
Ms. Krout, you have 1 minute.
We have a lot of opportunity across the state of Arkansas to make more use of things like wind and solar, particularly for our farmers. We could be, we have a large swath of land where we could be putting solar panels and creating more energy, allowing farmers to have more margin in their budget. They could be reinvesting back into their crops. These create jobs. This is going to help boost our economy. It's a more sustainable solution. And we've seen over the past several years, the weather is getting more extreme. We need to be preparing in that fashion and being proactive rather than reactive. Anytime we are trying to prevent an issue, rather than reacting to an issue, we are being more efficient with our money and our time and keeping our Kansans safer. And I think clean energy is a really neat way that we could do that, and we need to be catching up with the rest to be able to better serve our Kansans.
Back to Ms. Rutledge. Ma'am, you have 30 seconds.
As a 7th generation Arkansan who is now I have a century farm, I'm married to a row crop farmer, I can assure you that Arkansas farmers and ranchers are the greatest conservationists because our livelihoods depend on it. And so to hear from liberal woke left about how my husband can be farming better and what he can do better, let me tell you, no one cares more about the land that they farm than our Arkansas farmers. And so I encourage those who sit in their condominiums and apartments to come on out and enjoy Arkansas and enjoy what we have and to see what we're doing to protect our land, our livestock, and our livelihoods.
And we go to Mr. Gilbert.
All of these programs that we talk about, whether it's the loan forgiveness, whether it's government involvement in our choices as to energy usage, there are winners and losers. The winners tend to be those who are most closely associated with the government that is running the program, and the losers are always the taxpayers. I'm tired of being a loser in that regard. I hope we'll eventually stop this sort of thing.
Yeah, Ms. Krout.
Yeah, I was hoping someone would call me the liberal woke left today. That always just makes me smile. It's clear my opponent doesn't really know a whole lot about me. I really want Arkansas to be able to do better. I would never go in and tell a farmer how to run their farm. However, we can always be more efficient with our time and our money and our energy sources. I, like Frank, have solar panels on my house. It has drastically reduced a bunch of my bills and allows me more money to feed my kids and boost the economy here in Arkansas and do the best that I can as an Arkansan. It's just a responsible thing to be using clean energy. That's all.
Thank you. In general, you have 30 seconds, General Rutledge. No, I'm sorry, I've lost my place here. A question for Mr. Gilbert. Sir, you made mention yourself of your membership early on in the Oath Keepers. The leader of the Oath Keepers and several of his associates they are now on trial in Washington, D.C. on charges of sedition. When you joined the Oath Keepers, and the FBI and the Justice Department, a number of private individuals have labeled the Oath Keepers, among other organizations, as a domestic terrorist organization. Describe the Oath Keeper. Did you know? What was your first impression of the Oath Keepers? Are you still a member? And are you concerned about the role that such paramilitary organizations play in American public life now?
I wouldn't use the term paramilitary in describing the Oath Keepers that I joined. As a constable, I was approached by another law enforcement officer who explained the program to me, saying that it was a promise to the people that we served that we would never follow unconstitutional orders. During the Vietnam War, I saw Lieutenant Calley do terrible things to a Vietnamese village, and his defense was that he was following orders. Nazis after World War II tried to defend their actions, saying they were following orders. Police officers in this country more recently have killed people while following orders. I think it's important that law enforcement and military people assure the public we will not follow those orders.
Ms. Krout, 1 minute.
I was unaware you were part of that group, Frank. I was really disappointed, obviously, with most of the nation with what happened on January 6th and then on January 7th when we didn't see people stand up and denounce what had happened on January 6th. I'm trying to raise 7 sons to grow up and learn that it's pretty clear that we don't do things like attack the Capitol. I hear a whole lot of, supporting law enforcement and whatnot in this conversation, but what we need to see is that every election denier, every person who was siding with President Trump in this scenario, all of that conversation led up to what happened on January 6th. So we need to take responsibility for that action, and we need to have a good plan moving forward with safe and fair elections, which I believe that we have.
Ms. Rutledge, 1 minute.
Well, it's absolutely unnecessary violence on January 6th. And it's important that America move past it. I was nowhere near Washington, D.C. on that day. And so I think it's important that we as state leaders stand up against violence on any time. What we have failed to see is when we had marches across the United States, including right in central Arkansas and Little Rock, where we had individuals storming the Capitol here and defacing public buildings and private entities, even hurting one another. That we've got to stop that violence and go back to civil discourse. We can never have civil disobedience and accomplish what we need to in the United States of America. It's important that we are able to sit down, have those conversations eye to eye. That's one thing that as Lieutenant Governor, I'm going to be prepared to have those conversations to make certain that we continue to conduct ourselves as state leaders, till we promote people coming to the state of Arkansas and know that they're going to be treated with the utmost respect.
Mr. Gilbert, 30 seconds.
In your original question, you asked if I was still a member. I am not, because it's like a lot of organizations, they're terrible at outreach and staying in touch. They never billed me the second time. So I did not renew my membership. I probably would have, and I probably would now, if the organization is still founded on the concept of not following those unconstitutional orders that are sometimes given. The organization may have changed. I hate it if it did.
Ms. Krout.
Ms. Rutledge would like to see us move on from January 6th, but not without people being held accountable for what happened that day and everything that led up to that. I think it's important for history's sake that we establish what was right and wrong so that we can move forward in the right way and not let history repeat itself in that fashion again.
Ms. Rutledge, 30 seconds.
Well, let's focus on civil discourse and supporting our law enforcement. We want to make sure that law enforcement are supported with our resources to make certain that we tamp down this defund the police movement. We've seen crime increase in cities across the country where they have pushed to defund the police and not support law enforcement. As Lieutenant Governor, just as I've done as Attorney General, we're going to continue to support law enforcement and law and order in the state of Arkansas.
Next question, Mr. Evans, and it goes first to Ms. Rutledge.
Attorney General Rutledge, on the subject of ethics, if elected a Lieutenant Governor, you would get to appoint a member of the Ethics Commission. What are the qualities you look for in that appointment? And is there an area where you believe in Arkansas we could use a little bit of ethical improvements?
Well, thank you. With regard to the Ethics Commission, I've also, as the Attorney General, made appointments to the Ethics Commission. And I think it's important for me, I looked for someone that was going to be fair and reasonable, that had the right experience, that came about it with a very judicious temperament. It's important when you're looking at violations of the law, essentially, and serving on the Ethics Commission, that you have someone who looks at the facts and takes those facts into consideration, that doesn't bring their own political ideology or any bias to the table, but rather comes to the table with an open mind and being able to discern facts from fiction. It's important that we have ethical people serving in state government, and whether that's an appointee of the Lieutenant Governor or Attorney General, or serving in the State House or State Senate or in any office. That's why we started the Public Integrity Division at the Attorney General's office, where we investigate and prosecute state actors, state officials who violate the law. Every step of the way over the last 8 years, we have held public officials to that standard, and I will continue to do so as Lieutenant Governor.
1 minute now for Mr. Gilbert.
I guarantee you, as a lieutenant governor, you would get a very different kind of ethics member if it was up to me. There are political appointments, and this is not an area where a political appointment should be made. We need people who are not part of the party system, that are not involved in politics at any level. And I know good people who dislike politics to a degree that borders on illness. They might not be a good choice, but we have to have someone who doesn't have any strings or ties to any of the conventional party politics that we're used to. There is another area of ethics, and that is one that I would love to explore as Lieutenant Governor or any other way, and that is legal ethics. There are things that are legal in the state of Arkansas, but that are not ethical.
Thank you, sir. To Ms. Krout now, 1 minute.
Yes, ethics obviously incredibly important in our state government. We need people who are willing to be transparent, who are willing to be honest at all times, making sure that they're using the office for what is intended for and not trying to promote another office or campaign or anything like that. But I'd like to take the rest of my time to focus on something else Ms. Rutledge said about defund the police. She's actually the only person that I've heard mentioning that over and over again in this campaign. I actually spent the last year working for a local police department in a social work capacity and was able to ride out with officers and respond to mental health crises and help de-escalate those situations and divert them into mental health care as opposed to the criminal justice system. Law enforcement was wildly supportive of this, and it's a really neat program that I would like to see spread across the state. I think that's something that we could invest in that'll make our community safer. It will allow people to get the help that they need, and it allows law enforcement to do the job that they've been trained to do and do it well, and allows mental health professionals to be able to help in the capacity that they can. There's a lot of ways that we can creatively partner to make Arkansas better for everybody.
Ms. Krout, thank you. We go back now to Ms. Rutledge for 30 seconds.
Well, thank you. When it comes to appointments to the Ethics Commission, as I mentioned, I've already made a couple of those appointments. The first appointment I made was an African-American female attorney, and the second appointment I made was a Hispanic businessman. I think it's important that these appointments we make, whether it's as Attorney General, Lieutenant Governor, or Governor, reflect the state of Arkansas and reflect different views and values, and making certain that those individuals come to the table, again, with honesty, integrity, and to ensure that justice is done.
Rebuttal, Mr. Gilbert.
I mentioned ethical and legal, and I'd like to follow up that with just a little bit more. In my early career in politics, I was approached with a deal that a friend of mine wanted me to get involved in, and I ran from it because it offended me that they thought that I would be susceptible to that sort of thing. It was legal, but it was not ethical. And I think it's time that we look at politicians in that light and talk about that.
Ms. Krout.
We're still on this one.
You're right, you've got 30 seconds.
Yes, I don't have much else to add to this except that, yes, of course our leaders need to be ethical. Of course our leaders need to be transparent and honest with the Arkansas people. And really the bar is on the floor, right? Like, that is the bare minimum, is that we be ethical. Yes, we've seen issues in the Senate. We've seen people trying to pull one over on Arkansas voters and then not only not accept accountability for that, but then try to say, well, maybe I did that, but she did that too. And this is just not the maturity that we need in leadership in Arkansas. So we can certainly do better.
We want to let our audience know, everybody know, that the candidates can participate in a press conference immediately following our debate. So to watch, and you can scan the QR code on your screen with your mobile device, and you'll see that QR code periodically through the balance of our debate. Another question now, it comes from Ms. Munoz, and it goes first to Mr. Gilbert.
Okay, so this is switching to education, and this is another viewer question. This one is coming from Benton County. How do you plan to advocate for all Arkansas students having equitable education while the equity gap remains so large in Arkansas? Mr. Gilbert.
What a shame that we're still asking this question at this point in our history. We've been in the courts. We've resolved this question a half a dozen times in my lifetime to everyone's satisfaction, if there is such a thing. I don't see it being done by government. I don't see the state legislature, the governor, making decisions that will ultimately solve that problem. It will either be done within families or at the local level or not at all. I think the best that the state government could do is step out, clear the way, let entrepreneurs, mothers and fathers, let local school boards, let advocates of all stripes into that arena and let that energy change the whole system.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Krout, 1 minute.
Absolutely, we need to have equitable education across the entire state. As long as we are largely depending on property tax to fund our public schools, we are going to see inequities across the state. And we need kids in Northwest Arkansas and the Delta and South Arkansas and Central Arkansas to all have access to a quality education. While we're on education, we need to be talking about how we've got to pay our teachers more and what they're worth. I support the Democratic Party's plan to up teacher pay by $4,000 and raise the minimum starting salary. We have got to be making sure that public funds stay with public schools. All children should be able to have access to the same opportunities here. And listen, the money is there. We've all seen how the surplus in these conversations. And at the end of the day, our budget is a moral document. It shows what we care about. And if we are not fully, properly funding our schools to make sure every child has a good education and opportunity here in Arkansas, then our budget is not right. And we need to correct that.
Thank you. To General Rutledge, ma'am, you have 1 minute.
The first order of business in order to ensure all children have a chance at a quality education is to give their parents the choice in the education. A child shouldn't be held back by their parents' zip code or their parents' income. My sweet little mama taught elementary special education for 34 years. And every night I would watch her fill out individual education plans for all of her students. And as she filled out those IEPs, she was making sure every student had the opportunity to succeed. And that's what we should be focused on as a state, is every child learns differently. Every child should have an individualized education plan. My niece and nephew grew up under the same roof. My niece flourished in public schools where her mother taught, while my nephew, who's on the autism spectrum, was not flourishing and became homeschooled where he is now flourishing. So even under the same roof, children learn differently. So the first order of business is to make certain that parents have true choice in education and that we aren't constrained by their zip code or their income.
Mr. Gilbert, you have 30 seconds if you choose.
Again, the notion that a one-size-fits-all program, that the state of Arkansas knows what's best for every child in every circumstance, is an absurdity. We need to release students, their parents, to explore opportunities and avenues that are currently not available to them, because so much of their money is already going to pay for education that is failing. That was failing when the first lawsuit was filed, and it'll fail until we do it differently.
Ms. Krout?
I was also raised by a public school teacher. I'm a product of public schools, and I currently have 6 children in the Rogers public school system. I'm a big supporter of public schools. At the end of the day, again, if we are properly funding our public schools, there is a whole lot less need for all of this school choice and moving around. I have several friends who are utilizing charter schools, and they are doing that because they're not able to get what they need for their child specifically at their public school, and really they should be able to get that. I am always going to advocate for keeping public funds with public schools.
To Ms. Rutledge, 30 seconds.
In addition to promoting school choice, we also need to promote a workforce education plan in all of our high schools across the state to ensure that young men and women, when they leave high school, they can go directly into the workforce. For too long, we've told young people, you're either going to college or you're going to jail. Well, that's a terrible plan to put them on. Let's make sure that we are letting students leave high school with the tools necessary to get that job, whether it's a machinist, a mechanic, an electrician, a plumber, a nurse, whatever skill set it may be. Let's encourage them to have that in high school so they can become productive members of our society, take care of themselves and their family.
Question now, and it goes first to Ms. Krout. Once upon a time, many decades ago, the lieutenant governor came to the Capitol when the legislature was in session, presided over the Senate, and then went home. Now the Lieutenant Governor has more or less evolved into a full-time job with a staff. Will you, as Lieutenant Governor, make it a full-time job? Will you require a staff to include security?
Oh, to include security. You know, I hadn't thought about that yet, Steve. I do pretty well roaming around the state by myself right now. I'm not out to make the Lieutenant Governor a full-time position. I understand that the Lieutenant Governor, you know, job description would not require a full-time job. Like I mentioned before, am excited about this position to be able to advocate for policy across the state that would benefit the average Arkansan. Proactive policy before they need systems like the foster care system or the criminal justice system. I am really looking forward to just being able to be a voice for Arkansans. I'm not looking to make this position any more complicated than it already is.
Ms. Rutledge, 1 minute.
Well, as those who know me in Arkansas know that I don't do anything halfway. And so I'm going to put that same effort into being Lieutenant Governor that I've done as Attorney General. I wake up about 4:30, 5 o'clock every single morning, and we hit the ground running. We're going to take that to the Lieutenant Governor's office to make sure that we have the staff and personnel necessary to answer questions from Arkansans, to give them the help that they need. Already at the Attorney General's office, we increased the number of people we serve. We used to get 200 to 300 calls per week. Now we get 2,000 to 3,000 phone calls per week while utilizing the same number of staff. We're going to be more efficient than the Lieutenant Governor's office has ever been. And that is going to require us to work hard, to get up early and to stay up late. And that's what I've done as the Attorney General. That's what I will keep doing as the Lieutenant Governor to ensure that we're serving all 3 million Arkansans.
Mr. Gilbert.
I think as Lieutenant Governor, I would probably get up in the morning, check the newspaper, local radio and television, maybe check my news feeds and see if the governor had been indicted or died overnight. If not, I'd probably roll over and go back to sleep. We don't need a $46,000 a year featherbed job. And I would use my time as Lieutenant Governor to fill that bully pulpit that Teddy Roosevelt spoke of. And for me, that pulpit would be the Arkansas Township Amendment. It gives us the opportunity to bring governance to the people, to allow our motto, the people rule, to actually be taken seriously for a change. And I would work on issues like that and save the state some money. No staff.
Ms. Krout, 30 seconds if you wish.
I just want to say I'm glad Frank's here. I like you and I think you're fun. I would work very hard, obviously, at the position of Lieutenant Governor. I can work hard with it being a part-time job. I am also, raising a family. I will have a job outside of this. But what we can do is spend a lot of time advocating for the people of Arkansas. One of the issues that is nearest and dearest to my heart is the foster care system. I spent many years serving as a foster parent. I think there's a huge lack of awareness about what we can do to improve the foster care system. At any given time, we've got upwards of 5,000 kids in foster care, not nearly enough families, so we could do a lot for awareness for that.
Ms. Rutledge.
And as Lieutenant Governor, I want to be the economic ambassador for Arkansas to ensure that we're not only attracting new businesses to come bring in 400 and 500 jobs to a community, but also to help our businesses who have been in those communities for 25 or 30 years, working with the Economic Development Commission to provide grants for those businesses to add 5 or 10 more jobs, because those are the businesses that are making sure that we have school sports programs and propping up the organizations in those local communities, helping those small businesses across Arkansas.
Mr. Gilbert, the next 30 seconds are yours, sir.
Again, a bully pulpit is all I can see the usefulness of the Lieutenant Governor's job for. There are already agencies that are covering the areas that the Attorney General has talked about. It is time for us to not spend any more money that is wasted. And if you elect me your Lieutenant Governor, I won't waste any of your money or your time.
Our thank you goes to all 3 candidates for your responses to questions. Time now for closing statements. Ms. Rutledge, you have 1 minute.
Thank you, and thank you again to Arkansas PBS for this debate forum, but thank you to Arkansans for tuning in and watching. I've spent the last 8 years as your Attorney General fighting for you every single day, defending our constitutional rights and liberties against an overreaching federal government. whether it was during President Obama's term and making sure that we push back against the out-of-control EPA, fighting for our Second Amendment rights, protecting the right to life in Arkansas, which we have done and made Arkansas the most pro-life state in the United States of America. As your Lieutenant Governor, I'm going to use that experience. In the event that I'm called upon to be your governor, I will be ready to be your governor because I have the experience necessary to step in. We'll work very closely to ensure, again, that we protect all Arkansans while promoting economic success, education success, and providing safe communities for all Arkansans to live and thrive. It's been an honor to be your Attorney General, and I would be honored to have your vote to be the next Lieutenant Governor for the great state of Arkansas.
Ms. Rutledge, thank you. Mr. Gilbert, 1 minute.
Thank you again to PBS and to our interviewers. It was a pleasure to be here, as always, and you're honest. We can't ask for more than that. Thank you. I don't see the civility that has been talked about here on the stage today actually play out in our politics. I don't know the solution to it, but I know where we have to start, and that's in the hearts and the minds of the voters of Arkansas. A legislator told me this week that the divisiveness in politics is not the politicians' fault. They're just reflecting how the voters feel. Unfortunately, that's not true. The voters are manipulated by politicians. The recent debacle with redistricting proves that they're looking for voters, not thinkers.
Go now to Ms. Krout.
Yep. Thank you so much for having us. It's really been an honor, and it's been fun to get to share. I'm a mom. I'm a former foster parent. I'm a licensed social worker. I want to advocate for Arkansas families to be able to do well here. I am ready to serve. I'm a hard worker. I'm willing to listen and learn and be creative and help come up with solutions. I have no problem with working with people from both sides of the aisle and feel that we could make a lot of progress together. I know that there's a lot of rhetoric that happens in the political world that is kind of fearful and kind of manipulative, and I want you to know that I get why people use fear as a motivator. It is a powerful motivator, but hope is a more powerful motivator. I've been traveling all over this state, and I'm talking to Arkansans all over the place who have a lot of hope. I've got hope for Arkansas. You have a choice for Lieutenant Governor. You don't have to do what Arkansas assumes you're going to do this November. You get to decide. I'm Kelly Krout, and I hope you have your vote.
And once again, our thanks to our three candidates. We are captive to the clock, which tells us that the time for our debate has elapsed. Now, again, you can watch all of our debates, all the PBS debates, on demand at the Arkansas PBS YouTube channel, on the PBS video app, and on our website. The candidates once again have the option to participate in a press conference that's directly following this debate, which will air on YouTube as part of our live stream. Again, scan the QR code on your screen. Start watching on YouTube now. Once again, thanks to all of you for watching. See you next time.